The apartment sat silent on the last night of the year. A single lamp cast amber light across the small living room where Marcus Hayes occupied space meant for two. His dinner had gone cold an hour ago. The clock on the wall ticked past 11 each second, marking time he couldn't fill with purpose. Through the window, distant fireworks popped and crackled over the Chicago skyline, their color blooming and fading like promises nobody intended to keep. Marcus pushed the plate away. 38 years old and spending New Year's Eve alone had become routine, but that didn't make it easier. The silence wrapped around him like a familiar coat he'd never wanted but had learned to wear. He worked as a facilities engineer at North Point Industries, a job that kept buildings running and systems operational. Not glamorous work, not the kind of career that impressed people at parties he never attended, but it paid the bills and let him be home for dinner with Sophie. His 7-year-old daughter was spending the holiday with her grandmother across town. The apartment felt wrong without her laughter, without her toys scattered across the floor, without her endless questions about how things worked and why people acted the way they did. He glanced at the photo on the bookshelf, the two of them at the zoo last summer, both laughing at something the camera hadn't captured. That picture held more value than anything else he owned. 5 years ago, his wife Rebecca had walked out. Sophie was 2. Marcus had come home from a 16-hour shift to find a note on the kitchen table. The words still burned in his memory, despite the years. "I'm not cut out for motherhood. I never wanted this. I'm sorry." He'd found Sophie in her crib crying so hard her face had turned red, her tiny fists clenched. He'd picked her up and made a promise that night. Whatever it took, he would be enough for her. He would be both parents. He would show up. The promotions had come after that. 3 times in 3 years, management had offered him advancement. Operations manager twice, facilities director once. Each promotion meant more money, more responsibility, more respect. Each promotion also meant 60-hour weeks, constant travel, missed bedtimes, and a daughter who would grow up wondering why her father was never around. Marcus had declined all 3. His supervisor had looked at him like he was insane. Most people at North Point would kill for those opportunities, but Marcus knew what happened to people who climbed that ladder. He'd watched them transform from idealistic workers into exhausted executives who justified every compromise as temporary. They always promised themselves they'd do better at the next level, but the next level just brought bigger compromises. Eventually, they couldn't remember who they'd been before the climb began. He'd made his choice. Sophie mattered more than titles. Being present for her childhood mattered more than impressing colleagues who wouldn't remember his name in 5 years. The decision had cost him professionally, but it had saved him personally. He could look at himself in the mirror. He could hug his daughter and know he hadn't traded her for a corner office. His phone buzzed on the table. Sophie's face lit up the screen, a video call coming through even though she should have been asleep hours ago. Marcus smiled for the first time all evening and answered. Her dark hair stuck up in every direction, mussed from sleep. Her eyes shone with excitement that no 7-year-old should feel at 1:45. "Grammy let me stay up to watch the fireworks. Daddy, did you see them? Did you make a wish?" The ache in his chest tightened. Even on New Year's Eve, even separated by miles of Chicago traffic, his daughter worried about him. He forced brightness into his voice. "I saw them, sweetheart. They were beautiful. Did you wish for something? I wished for a puppy, and I wished you weren't alone tonight." The words hit harder than she could know. Marcus swallowed against the thickness in his throat. "I'm okay, Sophie. I promise Daddy's having a good night. But you don't have anyone there." Her small face scrunched with concern far beyond her years. "Grammy says everyone needs friends on New Year's Eve. Do you have a friend there?" Marcus glanced around the empty apartment. The lie formed before he could stop it. "Actually, yes. An old friend stopped by to say hello." Sophie's entire face brightened. "Really, I'm so glad. I don't want you to be lonely." Her yawn interrupted the sentence. "I love you, Daddy. I love you too, sweetheart. Now go to sleep. I'll pick you up tomorrow." The call ended. Marcus set the phone down and stared at the dark screen. He'd just lied to his daughter. No old friend was coming. Nobody was coming. He'd be alone when midnight struck, just like he'd been alone for the past 5 New Year's Eves. The clock showed 11:47, 13 minutes until the year turned over. Marcus stood and walked to the window. The fireworks continued their sporadic display, each burst of color followed by darkness. Other apartments in the building echoed with celebration laughter music, the clink of glasses. Marcus. Marcus heard all of it through walls that might as well have been made of paper. He thought about calling his mother, but she'd had enough of his presence for one day after watching Sophie. He thought about going to bed early, but sleep wouldn't come. He thought about a lot of things that didn't matter because none of them would change the fundamental truth he'd chosen this isolation. He'd built walls to protect Sophie and himself from the kind of pain Rebecca had inflicted. Those walls worked. They also trapped him inside them. The knock came at 11:52. Marcus froze. He lived in a building where neighbors nodded politely in hallways, but rarely ventured beyond their own doors. At this hour on this night, an unexpected visitor made no sense. He crossed the room, slowly, footsteps careful on the hardwood floor. Every instinct told him not to answer. Strange things happened in cities at midnight, but curiosity won. Marcus opened the door. Diana Westbrook stood in the hallway. For a moment, Marcus couldn't process what he was seeing. Diana Westbrook, CEO of North Point Industries, the woman who commanded a company of 4,000 employees across 3 states, the billionaire whose face appeared in business magazines and financial news broadcasts, was standing outside his apartment at midnight on New Year's Eve. She wore a charcoal wool coat over clothes that probably cost more than his monthly rent. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe style. Her face held that controlled expression he'd seen in company meetings, the one that revealed nothing. But something was different tonight. Her eyes moved too quickly, taking in his apartment with the sharp assessment of someone cataloging details they didn't expect to need. The usual armor had cracks in it. Mr. Hayes. Her voice was steady, but tension lived beneath the surface. Ms. Westbrook. Marcus stood in the doorway, acutely aware of the gulf between them. She ran an empire. He fixed heating systems and made sure lights stayed on. They'd spoken exactly twice in the 3 years he'd worked at North Point, both times in elevators, both times about the weather. I need to speak with you. Her words came clipped and formal. Now. Marcus glanced back at his cold dinner, his empty apartment, the television playing a New Year's countdown he'd muted an hour ago. Part of him wanted to ask how she'd found his address, why she'd come here, what could possibly be urgent enough to bring a CEO to an employee's home at midnight. Instead, he stepped aside and let her in. Diana walked into his living room like she was entering a boardroom. Her posture remained straight, her movements precise. But once inside, uncertainty flickered across her features. Her gaze traveled from the modest furniture to the children's drawings taped to the refrigerator, from the single plate of food to the window where fireworks still painted the sky. You have a daughter. It wasn't a question. She was looking at a photograph on the bookshelf, Marcus and Sophie at the zoo, both laughing. Sophie, she's 7, spending the holiday with her grandmother. Marcus didn't offer more. People like Diana Westbrook didn't make small talk, and they certainly didn't show up at employees' apartments at midnight to discuss family photos. Diana turned from the photograph. In the soft light of his living room, she looked younger than she did in the office and infinitely more tired. I apologize for the intrusion. I know this is irregular. Irregular is one word for it. I couldn't think of anyone else. She said it simply without drama, but the admission seemed to cost her something. Diana Westbrook, who commanded boardrooms and made decisions worth millions, couldn't think of anyone else to talk to on New Year's Eve. The clock struck midnight. Somewhere outside, cheers erupted from neighboring apartments. The fireworks intensified into their grand finale explosions of gold and silver and crimson, filling the sky. Neither Marcus nor Diana acknowledged it. They stood in his small living room, 2 people who shouldn't have anything in common, while the world celebrated the turning of the year. Diana moved to his window and stood with her back to him, watching the fireworks die down. There's a decision I have to make after the holiday. Something significant, she paused. Marcus watched her reflection in the glass. The woman in the window looked nothing like the CEO he'd seen striding through corporate headquarters. This woman looked lost. I've been going over the numbers, the projections, the legal implications. I've consulted attorneys and financial advisors and board members who tell me exactly what they think I want to hear. Marcus leaned against his kitchen counter, arms crossed. What do they tell you that I should proceed? That it's the rational choice? That the market will respond favorably? Diana turned to face him. But none of them tell me the truth. None of them care about the truth. They care about their positions, their bonuses, their proximity to power. With respect, Miss Westbrook, I'm not sure what you think I can offer. I'm not exactly part of your inner circle. Marcus kept his tone neutral. This entire situation felt surreal, a dream sequence that wouldn't make sense in the morning. That's precisely why I'm here. Diana's voice sharpened slightly. You have no stake in telling me what I want to hear. You have no political position to protect. According to your personnel file, you've been offered promotions 3 times and declined each one. You're either the most unambitious man in the company or the most principled. Either way, you're the only person I could think of who might actually be honest with me. The mention of his personnel file should have bothered him. The invasion of privacy, the surveillance, the fact that his CEO had researched his employment history in enough detail to know about declined promotions. But Marcus found himself more intrigued than offended. Whatever was troubling Diana Westbrook, it was significant enough to send her across Chicago on New Year's Eve to stand in a stranger's apartment to admit vulnerability to someone she barely knew. What's the decision? Marcus asked. Diana's expression flickered just for a moment. Marcus glimpsed something beneath the controlled surface. Fear, maybe, or exhaustion. I can't tell you the specifics. Not yet. But I need you to understand something. She stepped closer, lowering her voice as though someone might overhear them in his empty apartment. The people who advise me, the board members, the executives, they don't see me as a person. They see me as a position, a signature, a means to their own ends. I've built this company for 11 years, and I don't trust a single one of them. The words hung in the air between them. Marcus had worked in corporate environments long enough to know that loneliness existed at every level, but hearing it stated so plainly by someone at the very top was different. Diana Westbrook had everything the world said should make a person successful. Money, power, influence. And yet here she was alone at midnight, searching for someone who would tell her the truth. You don't know me, Marcus spoke carefully. How do you know you can trust me? I don't. Diana met his eyes directly. But I've watched you for 3 years. I've seen how you interact with the cleaning staff, the security guards, the interns everyone else ignores. I've read your emails, the ones where you advocated for better safety equipment for your team, the ones where you pushed back against budget cuts that would have affected the maintenance staff's benefits. She paused. You treat people like they matter. That's rarer than you might think. Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He glanced at the screen, Sophie's face again. A second video call coming through. His daughter should have been asleep hours ago. I need to take this. Marcus reached for the phone. Part of him expected Diana to object to remind him that she was his CEO and her time was valuable. Instead, she simply nodded and turned back to the window, giving him what privacy she could in the small space. Marcus answered the call. Sophie's face filled the screen, her dark hair even more disheveled than before, her eyes bright with sleepy excitement. Daddy Grammy let me stay up for midnight. Did you see the fireworks? Did you make a wish? He smiled despite everything. The tension in his shoulders eased at the sight of her. I saw them, sweetheart. They were beautiful. Did you make a wish? I wished for a puppy, and I wished you weren't alone tonight. Grammy said you might be lonely. Marcus's heart clenched. 7 years old and already worrying about him. A child shouldn't carry that weight. I'm okay, Sophie. I promise. Daddy's having a good night. Do you have a friend there? Grammy says everyone needs friends on New Year's. Marcus glanced at Diana, who was still facing the window, but clearly listening. Actually, yes. An old friend stopped by to say hello. Sophie's entire being radiated joy. That's good. I'm glad you're not alone, Daddy. She yawned, her eyelids drooping. I love you. I love you too, sweetheart. Now go to sleep. I'll see you tomorrow. When the call ended, Marcus looked up to find Diana watching him. Her expression had shifted in a way he couldn't quite define, something softer around the edges, something almost vulnerable. She worries about you. Diana spoke quietly. She's 7. She shouldn't have to worry about anything. Marcus set his phone down. But kids see more than we give them credit for. They know when something's wrong, even if they don't have the words for it. Diana was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different, stripped of its professional veneer. I used to worry about my father. She moved to his couch and sat down, the first time she'd allowed herself to settle since arriving. He ran the company before me, before it was public, before any of this. She gestured vaguely at herself, at everything she represented. He worked constantly. I barely knew him. By the time I was old enough to understand what he did, I'd already learned that the company would always come first. Family dinners were scheduled between meetings. Birthdays were celebrated whenever his calendar allowed. I grew up believing that was normal. Was it? Marcus asked. It was what I knew. Diana's shoulders dropped slightly, the rigid posture finally relaxing. My mother left when I was 11. She said she couldn't compete with a building full of employees for my father's attention. He didn't even fight for her. Just let her go and went back to work the next morning. Marcus didn't offer sympathy or platitudes. He simply listened, sensing that what Diana needed wasn't comfort, but witness. Someone to hear the truth she'd never been allowed to speak. I promised myself I'd be different. Diana continued, her voice taking on an edge. I'd make decisions based on data, not emotion. I'd treat every choice as a calculation weighing costs and benefits, minimizing risk. I built walls around everything that might make me weak. She looked up at him. But now I'm facing something that doesn't fit into a spreadsheet. The decision I have to make affects people, not just numbers. And I don't trust myself to make it correctly because I've spent so long learning not to feel anything. Marcus crossed the room and sat in the chair across from her. What is it you're afraid of, that I'll make the wrong choice because there's no one left to tell me to stop? No one who cares about anything except what I can do for them. Diana's hands clenched in her lap. I have 4,000 employees, hundreds of millions in revenue, a board of directors, a team of executives, more advisors than I can count. And tonight, when I needed to talk to someone who might actually be honest with me, the only person I could think of was a facilities engineer I've spoken to twice in 3 years. The apartment fell silent, except for the distant sounds of celebration still drifting up from the streets. Marcus thought about his own choices, the promotions he'd declined, the simpler life he'd chosen, the nights he'd spent working out the math of what mattered most. I turned down those promotions because of Sophie. Marcus spoke finally, his words measured. Her mother left when she was 2. Just walked out one day, said she wasn't cut out for motherhood. I was working 60-hour weeks back then, climbing the ladder, doing everything I was supposed to do to succeed, and then suddenly I was alone with a toddler and none of it mattered anymore. Diana listened without interrupting, her attention fully focused on him. I had to choose. Marcus leaned forward. I could keep chasing the career, hire nannies, miss birthdays and school plays, and all the moments you can't get back. Or I could step back, take a job that paid less but let me be home for dinner, be present for the things that actually matter. He met her eyes. I chose her. Every time I chose her, and I've never regretted it. But you gave up so much. Diana's voice was barely above a whisper. The opportunity, the advancement, the money. I gave up things I didn't actually want. What I kept was what I needed. Marcus paused, gathering his thoughts. You asked why I declined those promotions. It's because I've sat in enough meetings to know what that world does to people. They start out wanting to make a difference, and they end up making excuses. They tell themselves the compromises are temporary, that they'll do better once they reach the next level. But the next level just brings bigger compromises. Eventually, they can't remember who they were before. Diana's jaw tightened. You're saying I'm one of those people. I'm saying you're sitting in my living room at midnight because you're afraid you might become one. That's not the same thing. Marcus held her gaze. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Diana stood abruptly and walked to the window again, her reflection ghostly against the glass. When she spoke, her voice was harder than before. You don't understand the pressure, the responsibility. 4,000 people depend on decisions I make, their mortgages, their children's college funds, their retirements. If I make a mistake, I don't just lose a job, I destroy lives. And what about the decision you're facing now? Marcus asked quietly. How many lives does that affect? Diana didn't turn around. The restructuring plan I've been asked to approve would eliminate 347 positions across our Midwest operations. The numbers make sense. The facilities are underperforming. The market has shifted, and maintaining them is draining resources we need elsewhere. She paused, her voice dropping. On paper, it's the right choice, the responsible choice. The analysts have run every scenario, and they all point to the same conclusion. Marcus felt the weight of that number settle over him. 347 people. Not positions, not headcount, not resources, but people. Families. Lives that would be upended by a signature on a document. And off paper, he asked. Diana finally turned to face him. Off paper, those are people who have worked for this company for years. Some of them for decades. They chose us over other opportunities. They built their lives around the assumption that we would be there for them. And now I'm supposed to reward that loyalty by putting them out of work 2 weeks after the holidays. Is there another option? There are always other options. Diana's voice grew bitter. Slower restructuring, voluntary buyouts, retraining programs. But they cost more, take longer, carry more risk. The board doesn't want options. They want a decisive leader who makes the hard choices without flinching. They want someone who treats people like numbers on a spreadsheet. Marcus stood and walked to where she was standing by the window. Outside, the fireworks had ended and the city had settled into the quiet that came after celebration. The strange stillness of a world poised between what was and what would be. 3 years ago, Marcus said quietly there was a woman on the janitorial staff, Maria. She'd worked for the company 18 years since before you took over. She was diagnosed with cancer and the treatments were expensive. Her insurance covered most of it, but not all. She was going to lose her house. Diana frowned slightly. I don't remember this. You wouldn't. It never reached your level. But I remember the day she came to work crying because she didn't know how she was going to pay for her daughter's school supplies while also covering her medical bills. Marcus's voice roughened. Do you know what she said? She said she was grateful for her job because at least she had insurance. She said working for North Point was the only thing keeping her family together. What happened to her? Diana asked. She died last spring, but before she did, she told me something I've never forgotten. Marcus turned to face Diana directly. She said she didn't know if God was real, but she knew that kindness was. She said every time someone at work helped her, covered her shift, brought her lunch, it was proof that people could choose to be good to each other. He paused, letting the words settle. 347 positions. That's 347 Mariahs. 347 people who are trusting you to remember that they're human beings, not line items. Diana's composure cracked just slightly, just for a moment, but Marcus saw it. The tremor in her jaw, the brightness in her eyes, the way her hands clenched at her sides. You think I don't know that? Her voice came out rough. You think I haven't spent the last 3 months staring at those numbers and seeing faces I know their names? I've read their personnel files. I know who's a single parent who's caring for elderly parents who's 2 years from retirement. I know exactly what I'm being asked to do. Then why are you considering it? The question struck her like a physical blow. Diana stepped back, her professional armor reassembling itself even as her eyes betrayed her. Because that's what leadership is. Making the hard choices. Doing what's necessary for the greater good even when it hurts. Is it? Marcus didn't back down? Or is that just what people tell themselves so they can sleep at night after making choices they know are wrong? The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of two strangers finding common ground. It was the tense stillness of a confrontation neither had expected. You have no idea what you're talking about. Diana's voice lacked conviction. You fix air conditioners and check electrical panels. You've never had to make a decision that affects thousands of people. You're right, I haven't. Marcus refused to take offense at her dismissal. But I've made decisions that affected one person, my daughter, and I've learned that how you treat the one teaches you everything you need to know about how you'll treat the many. Diana stared at him for a long moment. The defensive anger in her expression slowly faded, replaced by something more vulnerable. Exhaustion, perhaps, or the weight of finally hearing a truth she'd been avoiding. I don't know how to be the person they need me to be, she admitted quietly. I was trained to analyze, to calculate, to optimize. No one ever taught me how to be kind when kindness isn't efficient. Marcus thought about Sophie, about all the times she'd asked him questions that had no easy answers. How do you explain loss to a 5-year-old? How do you help a child understand why some people have more than others? How do you teach someone to be good in a world that often rewards the opposite? When Sophie was 4, he said she asked me why I didn't yell at her like other daddies yelled at their kids. She'd been to a play date and seen her friend's father lose his temper over something small. She wanted to know why I was different. Diana watched him waiting. I told her that being loud didn't make you strong. I said that real strength was staying calm when you wanted to scream, being patient when you wanted to give up, choosing love even when it was harder than anger. Marcus paused. She looked at me with those big eyes and said, "But isn't it scary to be soft when everyone else is hard?" And I told her that was exactly why it was brave. Something shifted in Diana's expression. Not surrender exactly, but a loosening of the grip she held on herself. Leadership isn't about making the hard choices. Marcus continued. Anyone can be ruthless. Anyone can sign a piece of paper that hurts people and call it strategy. Real leadership is having the courage to find another way. It's accepting that doing the right thing might cost you something personally. And if there is no other way, there's always another way. Marcus met her eyes steadily. It might be harder. It might take longer. It might require you to fight people who are comfortable with the easy answer. But if you sign that restructuring plan, you won't just be eliminating jobs. You'll be telling every person in your company that their loyalty means nothing, that when times get tough, they're expendable. And once people believe that you'll never get their trust back. The night had grown colder. Through the window, Marcus could see the first hints of gray in the eastern sky. They'd been talking for hours and the new year had already begun, without either of them noticing the exact moment it arrived. Diana moved away from the window and sat back down on his couch. Her movements were slower now, weighted with thought. When I was young, I believed that if I worked hard enough, I could control everything. I could make the world make sense. I could protect myself from ever being hurt or disappointed or alone. Marcus sat across from her again, sensing that something important was happening, something she needed to say before she could move forward. But you can't control everything. You can't protect yourself from life. Diana laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. I've spent 20 years building walls, and all I've done is trap myself inside them. I'm 43 years old, and I don't have a single person I can call at midnight when I'm scared. I have employees and shareholders and board members, but I don't have anyone who knows me. Not really. Why did you come here tonight? Marcus asked. Really? Diana was quiet for a long moment. When she answered, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because I saw you in the lobby last week. You were with your daughter picking her up from the children's holiday party. She ran to you like you were the most important person in the world. You picked her up and she wrapped her arms around your neck. And I could see just by looking at you that nothing else mattered. Not the job, not the company, not anything. Just her. She looked up at him with eyes that held years of carefully suppressed loneliness. I've never had that. I've never been someone's most important person. And I realized that I was about to make a decision that would take that away from 347 other people. And I couldn't do it without at least trying to understand what I was destroying. Marcus felt the weight of her confession settle over him. He thought about all the times he'd seen Diana in the hallways or the elevator. Always composed, always in control, always alone. He'd assumed, like everyone else, that she had a life outside the office, people who cared about her places, where she could be something other than the CEO. But the truth was so much simpler and sadder. She had the company and nothing else. If I asked you what to do, Diana said slowly, what would you tell me? Marcus considered the question carefully. He knew the easy answer, the one she probably wanted to hear. Don't sign it, fight for those reasons, be the hero. But life wasn't that simple, and pretending it was wouldn't help either of them. I'd tell you that I can't make this decision for you. According to you, no one can. You're the one who has to live with the consequences, whatever you choose. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But I'd also tell you that Sophie taught me something about trust that I never would have learned on my own. Diana waited, listening. When she was learning to ride a bike, she was terrified, absolutely convinced that she would fall and hurt herself. She asked me to promise I wouldn't let go until she was ready. Marcus's voice softened with the memory. I promised. And then after about an hour of holding on, I realized she was never going to be ready. Not because she couldn't do it, but because the fear was too big. So I had a choice. I could keep holding on forever, keeping her safe, but never letting her grow. Or I could let go and trust that even if she fell, she would get back up. You let go. Diana's words weren't a question. I let go, and she fell. Not badly, just a small tumble onto the grass. She cried for about 30 seconds, and then she looked at me like I betrayed her. Marcus smiled sadly. I had to kneel down and explain that sometimes loving someone means letting them struggle, because the struggling is how they learn to be strong. Did she understand? Not at first, but she got back on the bike. And by the end of the day, she was riding on her own, laughing like it was the best thing in the world. Marcus leaned forward. You can't protect people from every difficulty, but you can make sure that when they struggle, it's for something meaningful, that their sacrifice serves a purpose greater than a quarterly earnings report. The gray light outside had grown stronger. Dawn was coming, pulling the city from darkness into another day. Somewhere across town, Sophie would be waking up soon, ready to come home. Diana stood. For a long moment, she didn't speak. She just stood in the middle of his living room, looking at him like she was seeing him for the first time. I've built my entire life around being in control, making decisions, giving orders, never showing weakness. And tonight, a man who fixes heating systems told me more truth in a few hours than I've heard in years of board meetings. Marcus stood as well. I didn't tell you anything you didn't already know. I just said it out loud. She nodded slowly. Maybe that's what I needed, someone to say it out loud. Diana moved toward the door, then stopped and turned back. The restructuring plan. I'm not going to sign it. Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. What will you do instead? I don't know yet. Something harder. Something that will cost me politically, maybe professionally. Diana's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. Something that means treating people like they matter. Marcus walked her to the door. In the early morning light, Diana looked different than she had hours ago. The tension in her shoulders had eased. The sharp edges of her expression had softened. She still looked like a CEO, still carried herself with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. But there was something else now, too. Something human. Thank you, she said it simply, for the honesty, for the conversation, for not treating me like a title. Thank you for trusting me with the truth, Marcus replied. She reached for the door handle, then paused. Your daughter is lucky to have you. I hope you know that. I know. I'm lucky to have her, too. Diana opened the door. The cold January air rushed in, carrying with it the promise of a year that had just begun. She stepped into the hallway, then looked back one more time. Happy New Year, Marcus. Happy New Year, Ms. Westbrook. Diana, she corrected. After tonight, I think you've earned the right to use my first name. She walked down the hallway toward the elevator, her footsteps echoing in the early morning quiet. Marcus watched until she disappeared around the corner, then closed the door and leaned against it, letting out a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His phone buzzed with a text message from Sophie. Happy New Year, Daddy. Grammy says you can pick me up at 10. I love you the most. He smiled, typing back. I love you the most too, sweetheart. See you soon. Marcus walked to his window and watched the first sunrise of the new year paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Somewhere in the city, Diana Westbrook was making her way home, carrying with her the weight of a decision that would change hundreds of lives. He didn't know what she would ultimately do, but he knew she would do it with her eyes open. Sometimes that was the most anyone could ask. The year had turned, the celebrations had ended, and in a modest apartment in Lincoln Park, a facilities engineer who fixed heating systems had somehow become the conscience for a woman who commanded an empire. Life was strange that way. The people who mattered most weren't always the ones with the most power. Sometimes they were just the ones willing to tell the truth. The weeks that followed New Year's Eve brought a cold that settled into Chicago's bones. Marcus picked up Sophie from his mother's house on the first day of January, and they spent the afternoon building a blanket fort in the living room while snow dusted the windows. She chattered about her time with Grammy, about the board games they'd played, and the cookies they'd baked. Marcus listened and laughed and tried not to think about Diana Westbrook or the 347 people whose fates hung in the balance. January 2nd arrived with a brutal clarity. Marcus returned to North Point Industries at 7 in the morning, an hour before his shift officially started. The building felt different. Tension lived in the fluorescent-lit hallways, in the careful way people moved through the lobby, and the conversations that stopped when he approached the break room. Everyone knew something was coming. The only question was when and how hard it would hit. Jamal caught him by the coffee machine, voice low. You hear anything, Marcus, about layoffs? Nothing official. Marcus poured coffee he didn't want just to have something to do with his hands. Carlos leaned in, glancing over his shoulder. My sister works in HR. She said they've been preparing separation packages for weeks. Whole team's getting cut. Marcus's stomach tightened. He knew more than they did, but he couldn't say anything. Diana had come to him in confidence. The midnight conversation existed in a space separate from the rumor mill that churned through every company facing uncertain times. When do they usually do this? Jamal asked. The layoffs right after holidays. Carlos's face was grim. January or February, when everyone's still recovering from Christmas expenses. That's when they dropped the hammer. The morning dragged. Marcus went through his rounds checking HVAC systems, inspecting electrical panels, responding to maintenance requests that felt trivial against the backdrop of what might be coming. At 1 o'clock, an email hit every employee's inbox simultaneously. The subject line was stark, important announcement pending. All employees board meeting in progress. Announcement expected 3:00 p.m. Please stand by for communication from CEO Diana Westbrook. The building's energy shifted immediately. People gathered in clusters, speculation running wild. Marcus retreated to the mechanical room in the basement where the hum of machinery drowned out the noise of anxiety. His phone buzzed at 2:47 p.m. A text from a number he'd saved the night Diana left his apartment. Going in. Wish me luck. Marcus stared at the message. Diana was about to walk into that boardroom and tell some of the most powerful people in the company that she was refusing their plan. That she wouldn't sign the document that would make their quarterly numbers look better. That she valued people over profits in a world that rarely rewarded such choices. His fingers moved across the screen. You don't need luck. You need courage. And you already have that. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, thank you. Marcus spent the next 13 minutes rebuilding a failing pump motor with more focus than the task required. Anything to keep his hands busy, while Diana fought a battle he could only imagine. The executive boardroom on the 14th floor bore no resemblance to Marcus's basement workshop. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago skyline. A table of polished mahogany stretched long enough to seat 20. 7 board members occupied chairs that probably cost more than Marcus earned in a month. Diana sat at the head, her posture perfect, her face betraying nothing. Richard Thornton, board chair and veteran of 3 decades in corporate leadership, opened the session. Diana, thank you for convening on short notice. We've reviewed the analyst reports extensively. The numbers are clear and we're prepared to vote approval on the restructuring plan. I assume you're ready to present your implementation timeline. Diana opened the folder in front of her. The room expected formality, a presentation, a vote, an announcement to employees, and then execution. Standard procedure that had played out in countless boardrooms across countless companies. Thank you for your time. I know you're expecting my recommendation on the restructuring plan. Thornton nodded. We've done our due diligence. This is the responsible path forward. That's why I called this meeting. Diana's voice remained steady. I'm not recommending approval. The silence lasted 3 seconds. 3 seconds where confusion gave way to comprehension and comprehension gave way to anger. Excuse me. Thornton's face went rigid. I've reviewed alternatives. I believe there's a better path forward that doesn't require immediate elimination of 347 positions. Board member Susan Martinez leaned forward, her expression sharp. Diana, we've been through this. The alternatives are too expensive, too slow, too humane. Diana didn't raise her voice, but the question cut through the room like a blade. That's not fair. Martinez's cheeks flushed. Isn't it? We're discussing the elimination of 347 jobs 2 weeks after Christmas. How is that fair? CFO John Chang, who had prepared the financial models that supported the restructuring, spoke carefully. With respect, Diana, the financial reality is clear. These facilities are losing $47 million annually. That's unsustainable for any business. I'm not disputing the numbers, John. I'm questioning whether layoffs are the only answer. What else do you propose? Chang asked, and Marcus would have recognized the tone skeptical, but genuinely curious, the sound of someone willing to be convinced if the argument was strong enough. Diana distributed new folders to each board member, a 3-phase restructuring over 18 months. Phase 1, voluntary separation packages for employees within 5 years of retirement. Costs $12 million up front, but saves $18 million annually in our highest salaries. Phase 2, retraining programs to transition workers from underperforming product lines to our growth areas, specifically the green energy division. $8 million investment, projected revenue increase of $25 million annually within 2 years. Phase 3, facility diversification. Convert Des Moines from legacy manufacturing to R&D hub. Repurpose Dallas as a distribution center. 35 million capital investment, projected 60 million annual revenue increase. She paused, letting them process. Total upfront cost, 55 million. Projected annual benefit, 103 million by year 3. Net gain of 48 million long-term versus 47 million short-term from immediate layoffs. The numbers hung in the air. For a moment, Marcus would have given anything to see the faces around that table as executives who had already made up their minds encountered data that challenged their assumptions. Thornton broke the silence first. 55 million upfront cost. The market will crucify us. Our stock is already volatile. Board member David Kim jumped in. We're talking about massive capital expenditure during uncertain economic times. Shareholders will revolt. Martinez's voice dripped with condescension. Diana, this is naive. You're prioritizing employee sentiment over shareholder value. We have a fiduciary responsibility. I'm prioritizing long-term value over short-term optics. Diana's composure held. Every study shows that companies with low turnover and high employee satisfaction outperform competitors by 20 to 30% over 5-year periods. Studies don't matter if we can't survive the next quarterly report. Thornton's patience was wearing thin. Is that what we are now? Diana leaned forward. A company that only thinks quarter to quarter. My father built North Point thinking decades ahead. Your father also made hard choices, Martinez shot back. He laid off 400 people in the 2008 recession and lost our best engineers to competitors. It took us 3 years to recover that institutional knowledge. Diana's voice sharpened. I learned from his mistakes. I won't repeat them. The room crackled with tension that had been building for months, perhaps years. This wasn't just about numbers or restructuring plans. This was about fundamental philosophy about what kind of company North Point would be about, whether compassion had any place in capitalism. Diana, we appreciate your compassion. Thornton's tone suggested he appreciated nothing of the sort. But this is business. Sometimes difficult decisions are necessary. Richard. Diana's use of his first name caught him off guard. I know you have 3 grandchildren. I've seen their photos in your office. What would you want someone to do if their employer faced this choice? Would you want them laid off 2 weeks after Christmas? Or would you want their CEO to fight for another way? Thornton's expression flickered just for a moment, something human beneath the corporate armor. That's not relevant, isn't it? Diana pressed. You've spent 30 years in leadership. You've made difficult choices. But you've also told me that your biggest regret was missing your daughter's childhood because you were always working. You said you wish someone had reminded you that there's more to life than the next board meeting. That's different. Thornton's voice was quieter now. How these 347 people have families, children, dreams. We're not just eliminating positions, we're changing lives. And I'm asking not as your CEO, but as someone who respects what you've built. Is there any part of you that wonders if there's a better way? The room went silent. Board members exchanged glances. Thornton stared at Diana, and for the first time in the meeting, his certainty wavered. Not difficult, a choice. Diana stood her hands flat on the table. We choose to eliminate 347 jobs. We choose to prioritize immediate savings over long-term growth. We choose to tell our employees that loyalty means nothing when times get tough. I choose differently. Then we need to vote. Thornton looked around the table, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. All in favor of the original restructuring plan with immediate job eliminations. 5 hands rose. Thornton hesitated, then raised his. Martinez, Kim, 2 others whose names Marcus would never know, but whose votes would echo through hundreds of lives. Opposed 2 hands, Diana. And board member Robert Chen, a quiet man who had built his fortune on patient investments and long-term thinking. The restructuring plan is approved 5-2. Thornton's voice carried the weight of finality, but there was something else there now. Doubt. Diana, you'll need to begin implementation immediately. We'll schedule an announcement for no. The single word stopped him mid-sentence. Pardon as CEO. I retain executive authority over operational decisions. I will not implement this plan. Martinez's face went pale, then red. Then we'll have to call a vote of no confidence. You're forcing our hand. Do what you need to do. Diana's hands remained steady on the table. But I will not sign an order that destroys 347 lives when there's a viable alternative. You won't have a choice if we remove you. Thornton's voice went cold, but there was conflict in his eyes now. Don't make this a battle, Diana. You'll lose. Maybe. But at least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror, and so will my 347 employees. CFO Chang spoke up unexpected. I'd like to review Diana's alternative plan more carefully before any vote of no confidence. The numbers aren't wrong. Conservative, actually. If the retraining succeeds, if facility conversions hit projections, this could work. John Thornton turned on him. I'm saying all business involves risk. The question is which risk we want to take. Chang met his glare without flinching. Do we risk short-term stock volatility for long-term stability? Or do we risk losing institutional knowledge, employee trust, and market position for a quarterly bump? You're saying if a lot. Martinez's skepticism dripped from every word. All business is built on if. Chang's response was steady. The real question is whether we trust our CEO's judgment and whether we're building a company that lasts or one that just survives quarter to quarter. The boardroom fell into charged silence. Alliances were shifting, certainties crumbling. Diana had forced a confrontation that most of them had spent careers avoiding. Here's what we'll do. Thornton's jaw worked, and when he spoke again, there was weariness in his voice. Diana, you have 90 days to show progress on your plan. If Phase 1 voluntary separations don't hit targets, if retraining costs overrun, if anything goes materially wrong, we vote. And you will either implement the original plan or resign. Agreed, Diana knew a trap when she saw one, but she also knew she had no better option. Agreed, 90 days. Then this meeting is adjourned. Thornton stood, then paused. Good luck, Diana. You'll need it, and for what it's worth. I hope you're right. The admission cost him something. Diana saw it in the way his shoulders sagged slightly, in the way he couldn't quite meet her eyes. Thornton wasn't just a corporate warrior. He was a grandfather who'd sacrificed too much for business and knew it. Maybe that was why her words had landed. The board members filed out. Chang lingered. That was either very brave or very foolish. I haven't decided which. Neither have I. Diana gathered her papers with hands that only trembled slightly. 90 days isn't much time. Then I'd better not waste any of it. At 3:15 p.m., every employee at North Point Industries received an email that would be discussed in business schools for years to come. Diana's words were careful but clear. She acknowledged the rumors, confirmed that a restructuring plan had been proposed, announced that she had declined to implement it, outlined her alternative approach. The reaction was immediate and divided. In the facilities department, Marcus watched his colleagues read the email on their phones. Some cried with relief, others exchanged skeptical glances. Jamal grabbed Marcus's shoulder. Did you know about this? I knew something was happening. Marcus chose his words carefully. I didn't know what she'd decide. She's going to get fired. Carlos shook his head. Board won't let this stand. Maybe, but at least she tried. Marcus thought about Diana standing alone in his living room, admitting she had no one else to talk to. Now she'd made the choice that proved she'd been listening. The stock market opened the next morning and delivered its verdict with brutal efficiency. North Point shares dropped 8% in the first hour. By noon, down 18%. At market close, down 24%. After-hours trading pushed it lower. By the time the financial news networks finished their analysis, North Point had lost 28% of its market value in less than 24 hours. The media coverage was merciless. Wall Street Journal, North Point CEO bets company on risky compassion play. Bloomberg, Westbrook rejects board's restructuring plan, stock tumbles. CNBC ran a segment titled, Is Diana Westbrook Too Soft to Lead? Marcus watched from his apartment that night, Sophie already asleep in the next room. The talking heads dissected Diana's decision with the casual cruelty of people who would never face consequences for being wrong. An activist investor named Marcus Thornburg appeared on screen, his smile predatory. Diana Westbrook just committed corporate malpractice. She's putting her personal feelings ahead of shareholder value. If she doesn't reverse course, we'll be calling for her removal. The anchor leaned forward. What about her long-term projections? Long-term is great if you survive short-term. North Point stock is down 28%. That's $3 billion in market cap wiped out. By tomorrow, activist investors will own 10% or more. And we'll vote her out. Marcus's phone buzzed. Diana's text was brief. Board member just called. 2 more resignations in protest tomorrow. Stock down 28%. Activist investor buying shares. Media calling me naive. But I meant what I said. I won't back down. He replied immediately. Sophie told me today that her teacher said heroes are people who do the right thing even when it's scary. I think she was talking about you. The 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before her response came through. I don't feel like a hero. I feel terrified. That's how you know you're doing something important. Marcus sent the message and hoped it was true. The next morning brought fresh chaos. 2 board members, Martinez and Kim, announced their resignations in a joint statement that couldn't have been more damaging if they'd tried. We cannot support a CEO who prioritizes sentiment over strategy. North Point's shareholders deserve leadership that makes rational, data-driven decisions. The stock dropped another 6 points. Activist investors circled like sharks who'd scented blood. And Diana Westbrook walked into her office at 6:00 a.m. to begin the fight of her professional life. CFO John Chang was already waiting. Coffee in hand, laptop open, exhaustion written in the lines around his eyes. Didn't expect to see you here this early. Didn't expect you to support me yesterday. Diana set her briefcase down. I didn't support you. I bought you time. There's a difference. Chang's bluntness was almost refreshing. Diana, I ran your numbers again last night. Your plan can work, but only if everything goes perfectly. 15% margin of error maximum. Then we'll make sure nothing goes wrong. That's not realistic. Something always goes wrong. Chang closed his laptop. The question is whether you can adapt fast enough when it does. The first challenge materialized within 48 hours. Phase 1 required 50 to 60 employees within 5 years of retirement to accept voluntary separation packages. Diana had budgeted $12 million for the buyouts, 1.5 times annual salary, plus full benefits until retirement age. Generous by any standard. But generosity meant nothing if people didn't trust it. By the end of the first week, only 18 people had signed up. HR Director Patricia Morrison delivered the news in person. They don't believe it. They think once they leave, we'll cut the benefits anyway. They've seen too many companies promise one thing and deliver another. Then we need to change their minds. Diana's jaw set up meetings, all 100+ eligible employees, 15 minutes each. I'll meet them personally. Diana, you're the CEO. You don't have time to. I don't have time not to. If this fails in week 1, we don't make it to week 12. The meeting started the following Monday. Diana cleared her calendar and spent 3 days traveling to Des Moines, Dallas, and the Chicago headquarters, sitting down with every employee who qualified for voluntary separation. Maintenance supervisors, quality control specialists, administrative assistants who'd been filing paperwork since before Diana was born. James Morrison, 52, sat across from Diana in a Des Moines break room that smelled of burnt coffee and industrial cleaning solution. His hands were calloused from 19 years of keeping machinery running. His wife had MS. His kids were in college. He'd seen enough corporate restructuring to know when someone was selling him a bill of goods. Why are you doing this? Meeting with people like me, Diana didn't flinch at the phrase. Because you're not people like you. You're James Morrison, 19 years with this company, 2 kids in college, wife with MS. I know your story. His eyes widened. You know all that. I should have known it sooner. Should have been meeting with you all along. That's going to change. Diana leaned forward. James, I need you to understand something. This isn't a trick. The separation package is real. The benefits are guaranteed. I'm putting my job on the line to keep that promise. Ms. Westbrook, Diana. After this, you've earned the right, Diana. His voice softened. I've never even seen a CEO before. And here you are in Des Moines drinking terrible coffee in our break room. Why should I trust this offer? What if it's just a way to get rid of expensive older workers? Because I'm giving you my word. And because if I break that word, I won't just lose credibility. I'll lose everything I've been fighting for. Diana met his eyes. I'm not asking you to trust the company. I'm asking you to trust me. And if I fail you, you can tell every reporter, every regulator, every person who will listen that I lied to your face. The silence stretched. Then James nodded slowly. Okay, I'll think about it. By the end of week 2, 47 employees had accepted voluntary separation, close enough to target, expensive enough to make the CFO wince. But it bought Diana breathing room. The breathing room lasted exactly 3 days. Board Chair Richard Thornton called an emergency meeting on January 12th. The video conference screen showed his face hard and unyielding, but there was something else there too. Fatigue, maybe, or the weight of a decision he didn't want to make. Diana. Two board members just resigned. Stock is down 32% from January 1st. Activist investors now own 8% of the company, and they're calling for a special shareholder meeting to remove you. I've secured 47 voluntary separations. We're on track. Diana kept her voice level. On track, you have 10 weeks left, and phase 2 hasn't even started. Thornton's patience had run out, and we have a proxy fight looming. The market doesn't believe in your plan. The market believed in crypto and subprime mortgages too. I'm not making decisions based on what traders think this week. Diana's controls slipped just enough to show steel underneath. Board member Robert Chen, attending via video from California, spoke up. Diana's right about one thing. If we force layoffs now, after she publicly promised not to, we'll face employee revolt, union action, probably lawsuits. At this point, we're committed. Then God help us all. Thornton's face filled the screen. We're scheduling a special board meeting for March 15th, 6 weeks. By then, phase 2 needs to show concrete results, or we're voting you out. No more chances. Understood. Diana's hands clenched below the camera's view. Diana. Thornton paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter. I have 3 grandchildren. You were right about that. And I do regret missing my daughter's childhood. But I also have a responsibility to shareholders who trusted us with their retirement savings. I hope you understand what's at stake here. I do. Diana met his eyes through the screen. For both of us. Thornton cut the connection. Diana sat in the silence of her office. 6 weeks, 42 days to prove that treating people with dignity wasn't just moral but practical. That compassion could coexist with capitalism. That she hadn't just destroyed her career and $3 billion in shareholder value for nothing. Her phone buzzed. An email from her assistant, subject line, a meeting request from Marcus Hayes. Diana stared at the name. The facilities engineer who'd told her the truth when she needed it most. Who'd shared coffee and honesty in equal measure. Who'd somehow become the only person in her professional life she actually trusted. She hit reply. Send him up. Marcus arrived 15 minutes later, still in his work clothes, canvas pants, steel-toed boots, a shirt with the North Point logo embroidered over the pocket. He looked completely out of place in the executive suite's marble and glass. Close the door. Diana gestured to a chair. Please. He sat clearly uncomfortable. I saw the announcements, the stock price, the media coverage. How's it going down on the floors? Diana asked. What are people saying? Mixed. Some are relieved. Some think you're going to get fired and then will get laid off anyway. Some, Marcus paused. Some are starting to believe you mean it. Do you believe I mean it? I wouldn't be here if I didn't. His answer came without hesitation. I need help. Diana said it plainly. I have 10 weeks to make this work. 47 voluntary separations secured, but now comes phase 2 retraining programs. That's where I need someone who actually understands what workers are thinking, what they fear. What would make them trust this enough to take the risk? I'm not qualified for that. I'm a facilities engineer. Exactly. You're not a consultant who'll tell me what I want to hear. You're not an executive protecting a career. You're someone who works alongside the people this affects, Marcus. I need someone who will walk the floors, talk to workers, report back, honestly. Not what makes me feel good, but what's actually happening. You want me to be, what? A spy, an advocate. Diana pulled out a folder. I'm creating a new position. Employee advocate. Reports directly to me. Your job would be to represent workforce interests in executive decisions. Make sure their voices are heard when we make choices that affect their lives. That sounds like HR's job. HR reports to the board. I need someone who reports to me and speaks for employees, someone they'll trust because he's one of them. Diana opened the folder. It's not glamorous, no corner office, no team of assistants, but it comes with something more important, a seat at the table where decisions get made, a voice for people who don't usually get one. Marcus sat back. This is everything I've avoided for years. Corporate politics, executive pressure, long hours, I know. That's why I'll promise you something. Diana leaned forward. Flexible schedule, work from home when needed, priority access to family leave. Whatever you need to be there for Sophie. I won't ask you to sacrifice your daughter for this job. And if I say no, then I'll respect that decision. And I'll still fight for these laws, but it will be harder without you. Diana's voice dropped. You helped me remember why I wanted to lead in the first place. I'm asking you to help me do it right. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Can I think about it? Talk to Sophie? Of course. Take whatever time you need. He stood. Diana, why does this matter so much to you? The question hung between them. Diana could have given a dozen answers about shareholder value and long-term growth and corporate responsibility. Instead, she told the truth. Because at the holiday party, I watched you with Sophie, and I realized I've spent my whole life building something that doesn't include love or connection or meaning, just money and power. She met his eyes. I can't get back the years I lost, but I can make sure 347 families don't lose what I never had. Marcus nodded slowly and left. Diana turned to her window, looking out over Chicago as afternoon faded toward evening. Somewhere in this city, Marcus Hayes would go home to his daughter and decide whether to risk the quiet life he'd built. Somewhere, activist investors were planning her removal. Somewhere, 347 people were going to work and wondering if they still had futures. And Diana Westbrook, who had everything except the things that mattered, was betting it all on the possibility that doing the right thing might actually work. Marcus picked Sophie up from school at 3:30. She bounced into the car, backpack swinging, face bright, with whatever 7-year-olds found exciting about Tuesday afternoons. They stopped for ice cream, their weekly tradition, and sat in a booth while Sophie devoured chocolate chip and Marcus barely touched his coffee. Daddy, you're quiet. Sophie's observation cut through his distraction. Just thinking about work, sweetheart. Is work bad? Not bad, just different. Marcus chose his words carefully. Daddy might have a chance at a new job. It would mean helping a lot of people. But it might also mean Daddy works some longer hours sometimes. Sophie's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. Would you still make my breakfast every morning? Would you still read me bedtime stories every night? Would you still come to my school plays? I would never miss them. Marcus reached across the table and took her small hand. Sophie, Daddy would never take a job that meant missing your life. That's a promise, then you should do it. Her 7-year-old certainty made it sound simple. Grammy says we should help people when we can. And you're really good at helping people, Daddy. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. His mother had said almost the same thing when he'd called her that afternoon explaining the offer. You've spent 5 years protecting yourself from getting hurt. Maybe it's time to risk something again. Not for you, for all those other Sophies out there. After Sophie was in bed, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with a legal pad and tried to think through the decision logically. Pros, meaningful work, chance to make a real difference, financial stability. Cons, longer hours, corporate politics, the possibility of failure. The lists balanced out until he remembered Diana's face in his living room at 2 in the morning, stripped of every pretense, admitting she had nobody else. He pulled out his phone and typed, I'll take the job, but on one condition, everything about flexible schedule in writing. And I report honestly even when it's not what you want to hear. If you can live with that, I'm in. The reply came 3 minutes later. Done. Contract will be ready Monday. And Marcus, I don't want you to tell me what I want to hear. I want you to tell me what's true. That's why you're perfect for this. Marcus stared at the message. Across town, Diana Westbrook was probably still in her office, probably fighting battles he couldn't imagine, probably wondering if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her career. And somehow a facilities engineer who'd spent 5 years avoiding risk had just agreed to stand beside her. He walked to Sophie's room and stood in the doorway watching her sleep. Her drawings covered the walls, princesses and flowers and stick figures labeled Daddy and Me. In one corner, a new addition, a woman in a business suit with the caption, The Nice CEO Lady. Marcus smiled. Sophie had met Diana exactly once at a holiday party for maybe 3 minutes. But even at 7, she'd recognized something in Diana that most adults missed. Someone trying to be better. Someone who needed a friend. He pulled out his phone one more time and sent a final message. Sophie drew a picture of you. She called you the nice CEO lady. Thought you should know. 3 dots appeared immediately. Then I've been called a lot of things in my career. That might be the best title I've ever had. The next morning, Marcus woke up to news alerts on his phone. Activist investor Marcus Thornburg had purchased another 4% of North Point stock, bringing his total ownership to 12%. He'd filed paperwork for a special shareholder vote to remove Diana from her position as CEO. The proxy fight was official. Marcus got Sophie ready for school, dropped her off, and drove to North Point, wondering if he'd just agreed to join a ship that was already sinking. But when he walked into the facility's office, Jamal grabbed him with an expression Marcus had never seen before. Did you hear Diana Westbrook is meeting with every single person eligible for the separation package? 3 days in Des Moines, Dallas, everywhere, sitting down with maintenance guys talking to them like they matter. Carlos nodded. My cousin took the package, said the CEO knew his name, knew his wife was sick, knew everything. He's taking early retirement, and he's telling everyone she's the real deal. Marcus felt something warm spread through his chest. Diana was doing exactly what she'd promised, meeting people, listening, treating them like human beings instead of numbers on a spreadsheet. And it was working, not because it was a clever strategy, but because it was genuine. His phone buzzed with a message from Diana's assistant. Please report to Ms. Westbrook's office at 10 a.m. Monday for contract signing and orientation. Welcome to the team. Marcus saved the message and got back to work. His shift in the basement checking systems and fixing problems would continue for 3 more days. Then everything would change. He'd have an office on the 12th floor, not executive level, but not the basement either. He'd have a title nobody quite understood. He'd have access to meetings where decisions got made that affected thousands of lives. And he'd have the weight of 347 families depending on him to remember they were people, not positions. To remind Diana when the pressure got too intense. To stand between the spreadsheets and the human cost. The weekend passed in a blur of normal routines, made precious by the knowledge they were ending. Saturday morning pancakes with Sophie. Sunday afternoon at the Children's Museum. Sunday night tucking her in and reading 3 extra chapters because she asked and because he could. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. Marcus put on the best clothes he owned, khakis and a button-down shirt that Sophie said made him look fancy, and drove to North Point feeling like an imposter. The facility's uniform had been armor. These civilian clothes felt like exposure. Diana's assistant met him at reception. Patricia Morrison, the same HR director who'd once processed his hiring paperwork, now walked him through orientation like he mattered. They covered benefits, schedule flexibility, reporting structure. Then she led him to an office on the 12th floor. It was small, a desk, 2 chairs, a window that looked out over the city. Nothing fancy, but it was his. Ms. Westbrook will see you now, Patricia gestured toward the elevator. Top floor. Marcus rode up alone, watching the numbers climb. The doors opened onto a reception area that could have been transplanted from a different world. Marble floors, abstract art, furniture that cost more than cars, and through glass walls, Diana's office. She stood when he entered. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the opportunity. Marcus felt stilted, formal, wrong. This isn't my world, Ms. Westbrook. Diana, we're past formalities. And it's not my world either. I've just learned to pretend better. She gestured to a chair. Sit, please. They spent an hour going over expectations. Marcus would tour facilities in week 1, conducting listening sessions with workers about the retraining programs. He'd report directly to Diana, bypassing normal chains of command. He'd have access to executive meetings when employee interests were at stake. I need you to understand something. Diana leaned forward. This won't be easy. The board is hostile. Stock is down 32%. We have 6 weeks until they vote on whether to keep me. And if I'm removed, your job disappears with me. I understand the risk. Marcus met her gaze. But I also understand what's at stake. 347 families. That's worth the risk. Diana smiled, a real smile, not the corporate mask she wore in meetings. I think Sophie would be proud of you. She already is. Marcus returned the smile. She drew another picture last night. You and me as superheroes saving the city. She's 7. She thinks everyone can be saved. Maybe she's right. Diana's expression turned serious. Maybe that's what this is really about. Proving that cynicism doesn't have to win. That companies can value people. That doing the right thing is possible even when it's hard. Or maybe we both get fired and become cautionary tales about idealism in business. Marcus kept his tone light. Then at least we'll fail together. Diana extended her hand. Welcome to the team, Marcus. Let's go change some lives. He shook her hand and something passed between them that couldn't quite be named. Not romance, both of them carried too much history for that. But understanding. Partnership. The recognition that they were about to attempt something that might be impossible. Marcus left Diana's office and took the elevator down to 12. His office waited empty and full of potential. He had 6 weeks to help Diana prove that compassion could coexist with capitalism. 6 weeks to give voice to people who usually had none. 6 weeks to show his daughter that standing up for what's right, even when it's terrifying, was how you became the hero in your own story. Outside his window, Chicago stretched in all directions. Somewhere in this city, 347 people were starting their workdays unaware that a facilities engineer and a billionaire CEO were betting everything on their behalf. The fight had only just begun. But for the first time in years, Marcus Hayes felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. Marcus's first day as employee advocate began in Des Moines, not Chicago. Diana had arranged the itinerary personally, 3 facilities in 5 days, listening sessions with workers who would either trust the retraining programs or reject them outright. The Des Moines plant sprawled across 6 acres of industrial territory, its parking lot half empty at 7 in the morning. Marcus pulled his rental car into a spot marked visitor and felt the weight of what he'd agreed to settle onto his shoulders. The cafeteria could hold 300. 150 workers showed up, their faces carrying the exhaustion of people who'd survived enough corporate restructuring to recognize when someone was selling hope that wouldn't deliver. They ranged from early 20s to late 50s, from machine operators to quality control specialists. What they had in common was suspicion. James Morrison introduced him, the same maintenance supervisor Diana had met with 2 weeks earlier. This is Marcus Hayes, new employee advocate. He's here to listen. A woman near the front crossed her arms. Employee advocate? What's that mean? Marcus stepped forward, no podium between him and the crowd. It means I work for Diana Westbrook, but I speak for you. My job is to make sure your voices are heard in decisions that affect your lives. So you're management's spy. The accusation came from a man in the back, his voice flat. No, I'm your representative, and I promise I won't sugarcoat what I hear. I'll tell Diana the truth even when it's uncomfortable. Marcus paused. I used to be a facilities engineer. Fixed heating systems and electrical panels for 3 years. I declined 3 promotions because I didn't want to become the kind of person who stopped seeing workers as people. That's why she asked me to do this. The skepticism didn't vanish, but it shifted slightly. One woman raised her hand. Sarah Chen, 38, quality control specialist. Marcus knew her file. Single mother of 3. 9 years at North Point. I've worked here 9 years. I'm good at my job. Why should I have to retrain? What if I fail? What happens to my kids? Marcus didn't offer false promises. Those are fair questions. What would make retraining feel safer for you? Guarantee my pay doesn't drop. Guarantee if retraining doesn't work, I still have my old job back. Sarah's voice carried the weight of a mother who couldn't afford to gamble with her children's futures. I'll bring that to Diana. Marcus made a note on the tablet he'd been issued. Can't promise she'll approve it, but I'll ask. The questions came faster after that. Michael Rodriguez, 61, wanted to know if early retirement would protect his pension vesting. Carlos Martinez, 43, wanted specifics on what jobs the retraining would prepare them for. A younger worker, barely 25, wanted to know why anyone should believe this wasn't just another layoff with extra steps. Marcus wrote it all down. 6 pages of concerns, 23 specific questions about implementation, 14 suggestions for improving the plan. By the time the session ended 2 hours later, his hand cramped and his mind spun with the complexity of what Diana had taken on. James caught him on the way out. You really gonna take all that back to her? Every word. Marcus tucked the tablet under his arm. That's the job. Most people in your position would filter it, make it sound better than it is. Then most people would fail. You can't fix problems you don't acknowledge. The Dallas facility was worse. Younger workforce more skeptical, angrier about being told their current skills weren't enough. Marcus faced questions that bordered on hostile and suggestions that amounted to telling management where to shove their retraining programs. He wrote it all down anyway. By the time he returned to Chicago Thursday night, Marcus had spoken with over 400 workers. He'd collected enough data to fill a small book. And he'd learned something crucial: people didn't distrust the plan. They distrusted that it would actually happen. Too many broken promises from previous management had taught them that hope was a luxury they couldn't afford. Friday morning, he met Diana in her office at 8. She looked like she hadn't slept, but then again, neither had he. Marcus laid out his findings without preamble. I talked to over 400 workers. Here's what I learned: they want this to work, but they don't believe it will. Diana leaned back in her chair. Why not? Because every restructuring they've seen has ended the same way: layoffs. They think this is just delaying the inevitable. Marcus pulled up his notes. Words aren't enough. They need proof. Guarantees. Skin in the game. What kind of guarantees? Pay protection. Anyone who retrains gets locked-in salary for 18 months, even if the new role typically pays less. After 18 months, if they succeed, they get the higher rate. Marcus watched her face. It's expensive. How expensive? Could add 5 to 6 million to the cost. But it's cheaper than turnover and wrongful termination lawsuits. The board is already questioning every dollar. Diana rubbed her temples. If I add another 6 million, then you tell them it's an investment in employee retention. You tell them scared workers don't perform well. You tell them trust is worth 6 million. Marcus leaned forward. Or you tell them what you told me on New Year's Eve: some things matter more than quarterly numbers. Diana was quiet for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and called the general counsel. Patricia, I need you to draft amendments to the retraining program. Pay guarantees and fallback provisions. Yes, I know it increases liability. Do it anyway. I'll handle the board. She hung up and met Marcus's gaze. You've been here less than a week, and you're already making me spend money I don't have. That's why you hired me. Yes, it is. Diana smiled, but the exhaustion behind it was palpable. The updated plan goes out Monday. Let's hope it works. The updated plan hit inboxes at 9 Monday morning. Employee reaction ranged from cautious optimism to outright disbelief. Board reaction was unanimously furious. An emergency conference call was scheduled for that afternoon. Marcus wasn't invited to the board call, but he heard about it afterward from John Chang. Thornton lost it completely. Accused Diana of fiscal irresponsibility, emotional decision-making, everything short of incompetence. 2 more board members are calling for her removal before the scheduled March vote. How did she respond? Marcus asked. Like she always does. Calm, rational. Cited retention studies and long-term value creation. Chang shook his head. But numbers don't matter when people have already decided you're wrong. She's got 5 weeks until the vote. This better work. It had to work. Because failure meant more than Diana losing her job. It meant 347 families losing their livelihoods. It meant proving that treating people with dignity was incompatible with business success. It meant every cynic who'd ever argued that compassion was weakness would be proven right. February brought the kind of cold that made Chicago feel hostile. Marcus fell into a rhythm that left him exhausted but purposeful. Wake at 5:30, make Sophie breakfast, drop her at school by 7:15, office by 8, meetings, calls, facility tours, home by 6 to make dinner and help with homework, bedtime stories at 8, then back online for West Coast calls until 10. Sophie noticed. Daddy, you're tired a lot now. I know, sweetheart, but I'm helping people keep their jobs. That's important work, like being a superhero. Her 7-year-old logic made everything simple. Not quite that exciting, more like being a translator, helping people understand each other. Grammy says translators are important too. Sophie hugged him tight. I'm proud of you, Daddy. Those moments kept him going when the work threatened to drown him, because the work was drowning him. Retraining programs launched in the second week of February. 180 workers enrolled across 3 facilities. Green energy technology, advanced manufacturing processes, data analytics. Each program ran 8 weeks with a mix of classroom instruction and on-the-job training. The first dropout happened in week 3. Robert Wilson, 55 legacy manufacturing background, struggled with computer-based training. He came to Marcus's office in tears. I can't do this. I feel like an idiot. Everyone else understands the software and I'm too old for this. Marcus walked him through the fallback provision. You're not too old. The training's not a good fit. That's different. You've got a guaranteed position in facilities maintenance at your current pay. No penalties. No questions. I'm a failure. Robert's voice broke. You're a person who tried something difficult and decided it wasn't right for you. That takes courage. Marcus kept his tone steady. The promise was that we'd take care of you either way. We're keeping that promise. Robert took the maintenance position. One dropout out of 180 felt manageable. Then week 4 brought 3 more. Week 5 brought another 2. By the end of February 12, workers had dropped out a 6.7% attrition rate. Diana stared at the numbers on her screen. We projected 10 to 15% wouldn't complete. 12 is actually better than expected. Try telling that to the board. Marcus had just gotten off a call with Thornton's office. They're using every dropout as evidence the plan is failing. What do you think Diana's question was genuine? You're on the ground. You talk to these workers every day. Is it failing? No, Marcus pulled up his reports. 168 people are still in training. Most of them are succeeding. The 12 who dropped out all have jobs at the same pay. That's not failure. That's the safety net working exactly as designed. But it's costing more than projected. Diana highlighted the budget overruns. $6 million for pay guarantees plus reassignment costs plus training materials that cost more than quoted. We're 8% over budget, which is within contingency, Marcus countered. And the workers who've completed training are performing at 85% of full productivity after just 1 month. That's 15% better than projected. Diana absorbed this. Then why does it feel like we're losing? Because we are losing, just not the way they think. Marcus chose his words carefully. We're losing the PR war. Stock's still down. Media's still calling you naive. Activist investors are still buying shares. But the actual restructuring is working. Workers are retraining. Morale's up 30%. Turnover's down 40%. We're winning where it matters, if we survive until April. Diana's exhaustion showed through. March 15th is in 2 weeks. If the board votes me out before quarterly earnings, none of this matters. Then we make sure they don't. Marcus stood. What do you need from me? Keep doing what you're doing. Keep listening. Keep reporting honestly. Keep reminding me why we're fighting. Diana's voice caught slightly. Marcus, I couldn't do this without you. Yes, you could. You just wouldn't have to do it alone. Marcus headed for the door, then paused. My mother told me something when I took this job. She said the people who matter most aren't always the ones with the most power. Sometimes they're just the ones willing to tell the truth. Your mother sounds wise. She raised a stubborn son who turned down 3 promotions to read bedtime stories. I'd say she did all right. The crisis came on a Tuesday in late February, and it came in the form of a phone call Marcus would never forget. He was in his office reviewing training completion rates when Diana's assistant appeared in his doorway, face pale. Marcus, Diana needs you upstairs, now. He took the stairs 2 at a time, heart pounding. Diana's office door was closed. Through the glass walls, he could see her on the phone, her face stricken. She saw him and motioned him in. I understand. Yes. Please keep me informed. Diana hung up and looked at Marcus. We have a problem. David Chen, 57, Dallas facility, enrolled in the data analytics retraining program. Marcus pulled up his notes. I remember him. Been with the company 23 years. 2 kids. Wife's a teacher. He attempted suicide last night. Diana's voice was flat shock, making it toneless. His wife found him in their garage. He's in ICU, stable, but... Marcus sat down hard. What happened? He left a note. Diana handed Marcus a printout that had been faxed from the Dallas Police Department. The words blurred as Marcus tried to read them, but a few phrases stood out. Can't learn this. Too old. Failing. Better off without me. The training. Marcus felt sick. He thought he was failing. His supervisor says David was struggling, falling behind, too proud to ask for help. Apparently, he didn't understand the fallback provision applied to him. Thought if he couldn't complete the program, he'd lose his job. Diana's hands trembled slightly. Marcus, a man tried to kill himself because of a program I created. No, Marcus's voice was firm. A man struggled because corporations have spent decades teaching workers they're disposable. This isn't your fault. I'm the CEO. Everything is my fault. Diana stood paced to the window. We need to shut it down. The whole program. I can't. Shutting it down proves him right. Marcus stood too. It proves that workers who struggle should be afraid, that there's no safety net. Then what do I do? Diana's control was slipping. A man is in the hospital because he was terrified of my program. We fix it. We make sure every single worker knows about the fallback provision. We add counseling. We create buddy systems. We make it impossible for anyone to feel this alone again. Marcus moved to stand beside him. And we visit David when he's recovered enough. We tell him he has a job, that we failed him, not the other way around. The board will use this. Diana's voice was barely above a whisper. They'll say I'm putting workers at risk, that my compassion is dangerous. Let them try. Marcus felt anger building. David Chen worked 23 years for this company. 23 years. And he was so terrified of losing his job that he'd rather die than fail. That's not your program's fault. That's the culture you're trying to change. Diana turned to him, and for the first time since Marcus had known, her tears tracked down her face. I thought I was helping. I thought you are helping. 168 workers are succeeding. 12 found other positions. And now David Chen will get the support he should have had from the beginning. Marcus's voice softened. This is terrible. But it's not a reason to stop. It's a reason to do better. The next 48 hours were a blur. Diana suspended all training programs pending a full review. She implemented mandatory check-ins with every participant. She hired counselors. She created peer support groups. She personally called every single worker in the program to explain the fallback provision again. And on Thursday, when David Chen was stable enough for visitors, Diana and Marcus flew to Dallas. The hospital room was small and smelled of antiseptic. David looked smaller than his file photo suggested, diminished by tubes and monitors. His wife Amy sat beside the bed, her eyes red from crying. She stood when Diana and Marcus entered, her expression defensive. You shouldn't be here. I know. Diana's voice was gentle, but I needed to see David, to tell him something important. David's eyes opened, blurry with medication but aware. Ms. Westbrook. Diana pulled a chair close to the bed. David, I'm so sorry. We failed you. I failed you. The training program should have had better support systems. You should have known you had options. You should never have felt this alone. I couldn't do it. David's voice was rough. The software, the analytics, everyone else understood, and I'm too old, too stupid. No, Diana's firmness cut through his self-recrimination. You're not too old or stupid. The program didn't meet your needs. That's on me, not you. And I need you to understand something. David, you have a job, whether you complete the training or not, whether you want to try again or take a different position. You have a job at North Point Industries for as long as you want one. David blinked, confusion replacing despair. But I failed. You didn't fail. The program failed you. Marcus stepped forward. David, I'm Marcus Hayes, employee advocate. My entire job is to make sure workers like you aren't forgotten. And I promise you this will never happen again. We're changing everything. More support, more flexibility, more humanity. Amy spoke up, her voice thick with emotion. He has a job. Really? Really? Diana met her eyes. And I'm putting it in writing, David. When you're ready in a week, a month, whenever you come back, we'll find the right position for you, one that uses your 23 years of experience, one that values what you know, not what you don't. David's face crumpled. 23 years, and I almost... His wife gripped his hand, but you didn't. Diana's voice was steady. You're here. You're alive. And you're going to stay that way because we're going to do better. All of us. They stayed for an hour, Diana and Amy talking in low voices about insurance and medical leave. Marcus and David discussing what kinds of work David might want to do. By the time they left, David was sleeping peacefully, his wife's hand still in his. On the flight back to Chicago, Diana stared out the window at clouds lit by the setting sun. That could have been the end of everything. If Amy hadn't found him in time, but she did. Marcus kept his voice level. And now you've made sure no one else falls through the cracks. The board will crucify me for this. Probably, but you'll still be able to look at yourself in the mirror. The Dallas incident changed everything. News of David Chen's suicide attempt leaked. Marcus suspected a board member, though he could never prove it. The media pounced. CNBC ran a feature titled, "North Point's Compassionate Restructuring Drives Worker to Suicide Attempt." The stock dropped another 8 points. Activist investors intensified their campaign. But something else happened too. Workers rallied. At the Dallas facility, employees who'd been skeptical of the retraining program became its fiercest defenders. "We're not letting David's struggle be used against the CEO who actually tried to help him." The message spread to Des Moines to Chicago. Union representatives who'd been neutral issued statements of support. By the time the board meeting arrived on March 15th, battle lines had been drawn in ways no one expected. The boardroom felt different this time. 7 board members, but the dynamics had shifted. Thornton still sat at the head of the table, but his face carried new lines of worry. Diana sat composed, but there was steel in her spine that hadn't been there in January. Marcus sat in the observer section, invited again at Diana's insistence. Beside him sat Amy Chen, holding a letter from her husband. "Diana, we've all seen the news about David Chen." Thornton's voice was careful. "This is exactly the kind of incident we were trying to avoid." Before Diana could respond, Amy stood. "May I speak?" Thornton looked surprised. "Mrs. Chen, this is a board meeting. With respect, my husband almost died because he thought your company didn't value him. I think I've earned the right to speak." Amy's voice shook but didn't break. Thornton glanced at Diana, who nodded. "Proceed." David worked for North Point for 23 years, through recessions, through restructurings, through everything. And every time he was terrified he'd be next. That's not because of Diana Westbrook's program. That's because of the culture this company created before she got here. Amy pulled out the letter. "David asked me to read this." She unfolded the paper, hands trembling. "To the board of directors. My name is David Chen. I attempted to take my life because I believed I was worthless. For 23 years, I'd watched companies treat workers as disposable. When I struggled with the retraining program, I assumed I was finished. I was wrong. Diana Westbrook visited me in the hospital. She told me I had value. She told me I had a job. She told me the program had failed me, not the other way around. I'm writing this to tell you, don't fire her. She's the first CEO in my career who treated me like a human being. If you fire her for caring too much, you're telling every worker in this company that caring is wrong. Please, don't let her compassion be punished." The room fell silent. Amy sat down, wiping her eyes. Thornton cleared his throat. "Mrs. Chen, thank you for sharing that. But the board has a responsibility to Diana interrupted, her voice cutting. To shareholders who want short-term gains, or to workers who build this company every day? To both." Thornton met her gaze. "That's the challenge of leadership. Then let me tell you what leadership looks like." Diana stood. "Leadership is visiting David Chen in the hospital and telling him he matters. Leadership is changing an entire program because one person fell through the cracks. Leadership is fighting for 168 workers who are succeeding even when media only covers the one who struggled." She pulled out her tablet. Phase 2 results 82% completion rate. That's 12 points higher than industry average. Workers who completed are performing at 87% productivity after 4 weeks. Morale is up 35%. Turnover is down 45%. Cost per employee retained, it is half what replacement would cost. Diana looked around the table. "David Chen attempted suicide because he thought he was disposable. If we fire me for trying to prove he's not, we're telling every worker in this company that they were right to be afraid. Is that the message you want to send?" Thornton was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Marcus. "Mr. Hayes, wow. You've been on the ground. What's your assessment?" Marcus stood, pulling out Sophie's newest drawing. She'd made it the night before, people holding hands around a building, the words "Everyone Matters" written in crayon across the top. "My 7-year-old daughter drew this. She doesn't understand stock prices or quarterly earnings, but she understands something this board seems to have forgotten. Companies are made of people." Marcus set the drawing on the table. "I've talked to hundreds of workers over the past 2 months. You know what they tell me? For the first time in their careers, they believe their CEO sees them. Not as headcount, not as resources, as people." David Chen's suicide attempt was tragic. But you know what's more tragic? The fact that he worked here 23 years and was so terrified of being disposable that he'd rather die than ask for help. Diana Westbrook didn't create that fear. She's trying to end it. Hart, the activist investors nominee, leaned forward. That's very touching, Mr. Hayes, but this board has a fiduciary duty to build a sustainable company. Marcus cut her off. You keep saying shareholder value like it's separate from employee value. But workers are people with retirement accounts. They're shareholders too. And Diana Westbrook is creating more value for them than any short-term stock bump ever could. He looked at Thornton. You asked me what I've seen on the ground. I've seen Sarah Chen learn data analytics and discover she's brilliant at it. I've seen James Morrison retire with dignity and full benefits. I've seen 168 people prove they're not disposable. And I've seen one CEO fight harder for her workers than anyone I've ever known. Marcus picked up the drawing. My daughter thinks we're superheroes. We're not. We're just people trying to do the right thing in a world that makes it really hard. But isn't that what leadership actually is? The room went silent. Thornton looked at the drawing at Amy Chen at Diana. When he spoke, his voice carried a weariness that came from years of difficult choices. Let's vote. All in favor of removing Diana Westbrook as CEO. 3 hands rose. Hart and 2 others. Opposed 4 hands. Thornton, Chen Chang, and Werner. Diana's breath caught audibly. The motion fails 4-3. Thornton met Diana's eyes. Diana, you keep your position, conditional on April earnings meeting projections. No more incidents, no more surprises. Understood. Diana's voice was steady despite the emotion in her eyes. And Diana Thornton stood. What you're doing, what you're trying to build, it matters. I voted against you in January because I thought compassion was weakness. My grandchildren would be ashamed of that. You've got 6 weeks to prove we can be profitable and humane. Don't waste them. The board filed out. Amy Chen hugged Diana, whispering thank you over and over. Marcus waited until they were alone. 4-3, we survived. Again. Diana looked at him. How many times can we keep doing this? As many times as it takes, Marcus smiled. Besides, we've got momentum now. Workers are rallying. The board is shifting. Even Thornton's coming around. 6 weeks. Diana's exhaustion showed through. 6 weeks to prove everything. Then let's make them count. April arrived with cherry blossoms and cautious hope. The final cohort of workers completed retraining in early April. Final success rate 82%. 147 workers successfully transitioned to new roles. 33 opted for fallback positions or retirement packages. Every single person kept their job and their salary. 0 involuntary layoffs. Diana restructured the program based on lessons from David Chen's case. Mandatory peer support. Weekly counseling check-ins. Clear repeated communication about fallback provisions. David himself returned to work in late March, taking a position in quality control that used his decades of manufacturing knowledge. His first day back, workers lined up to welcome him. The local news covered it. The story went viral. CFO John Chang presented quarterly earnings to the board on April 14th. Revenue $847 million, $7 million above projections. Profit $91 million, $6 million above expectations. Beat analyst estimates by 8%. The drivers were clear. Productivity up 14%. Workers who felt valued produced exceptional results. Turnover costs down $12 million. Retention translated directly to bottom line. Customer satisfaction up 18%. Engaged employees delivered superior service. The stock market opened April 15th with North Point shares at $59, down from $82 on January 1st. But the earnings release changed everything. By 9:30, the stock hit 68. By noon 76, market close $81. By the end of the following week, $88, 6 points above where the year started. The media that had crucified Diana 4 months earlier scrambled to rewrite the narrative. Wall Street Journal, North Point's compassionate restructuring delivers results. Bloomberg, Diana Westbrook proves humanity and profit can coexist. Harvard Business Review requested a case study. Activist investor Marcus Thornberg sold his stake and admitted publicly, I underestimated both the CEO and the workers. This proved that long-term thinking beats short-term panic. But for Diana and Marcus, the real victory came quietly. An email from David Chen sent to the entire company. I came back from the darkest place a person can go. I came back because Diana Westbrook told me I mattered. To every worker reading this, you matter. Never forget that. 347 jobs saved. 147 lives transformed through retraining. 33 given dignified alternatives. 1 prevented tragedy. 0 broken promises. The afternoon of the earnings announcement, Marcus sat in Diana's office as congratulations poured in from industry leaders, board members, and employees. Diana watched the messages pile up with something like disbelief. We did it. She said it like she couldn't quite believe it. You did it, Marcus smiled. I just helped. No, Diana met his eyes. We did it, together. I couldn't have survived January without you. I wouldn't have known about the gaps in the program without you. I wouldn't have kept fighting without you. That's what partners do. The word hung in the air between them. Not romantic partners, neither was ready for that, might never be. But partners in the truest sense. 2 people who'd chosen to fight for something that mattered, who'd refused to give up when everyone said they should. What happens now? Marcus asked. Now we make it permanent. Diana pulled out a folder. VP of People and Culture, all the HR functions, diversity employee programs. Reports directly to CEO. Ironclad contract language about work-life balance and family priority. She handed him the envelope. Make sure what we built lasts beyond both of us. Marcus stared at the offer. VP, executive level. The 4th promotion he had been offered. But this one was different. Sophie's school play is Friday. He said it without thinking. I know, Diana smiled. It's in your contract. You can't miss it. What if there's an emergency then? I'll handle it. Or it'll wait until Monday. Marcus, the whole point of this position is to prove that caring about people isn't a weakness. You can't do that if you're sacrificing your own family. Can I think about it? Of course. But Marcus, you've spent the last 4 months proving that people matter. Let us prove it back to you. That night, Marcus sat Sophie down after dinner. Daddy's been offered another promotion. But you said you'd never miss my play. Sophie's face crumpled. And I won't. Marcus pulled her close. This promotion is different. The boss put it in writing. Daddy will always be home for what matters. Sophie looked up at him with those big eyes that saw everything. Is it helping people like you do now? Even more. Daddy would make sure everyone in the company gets to be with their families. Like I get to be with you. Then you should do it. Grammy says you should always help people when you can. Sophie hugged him tight. I'm proud of you, Daddy. You're really a superhero now. I'm not a superhero, sweetheart. Just a dad who loves you more than anything. That's what makes you a superhero. Marcus made it to Sophie's school play on Friday, front row, bouquet of flowers, video camera ready. She played a tree in the school forest scene. Not a starring role, but she delivered her one line, the seasons change, but our roots stay strong, with such earnestness that Marcus's eyes stung. After the play, Sophie ran to him. Did you see Daddy? Did you see? I saw every second. Marcus lifted her up. You were amazing. Miss Westbrook came. Sophie pointed to the back of the auditorium, where Diana stood looking completely out of place among the other parents, but smiling genuinely. She did. Marcus was stunned. Diana made her way over. Hope you don't mind. You've come to enough of my important meetings. Thought I should come to one of yours. This is Ms. Westbrook. Sophie studied her. The nice CEO lady? That's me. Diana knelt to Sophie's level. You were wonderful. And your costume was perfect. I'm a tree. Trees are strong, like Daddy says people should be. Sophie's 7-year-old logic made it simple. Your daddy's right. Diana met Marcus's eyes over Sophie's head. Trees need strong roots. And your daddy has the strongest roots I've ever seen. December arrived with snow and the strange sensation of having survived something impossible. The holiday party was scheduled for the 17th, exactly 1 year after the party where everything had started. Marcus brought Sophie this time. She wore a red velvet dress and her favorite light-up shoes. Diana gave her speech at 7 p.m. to 400 employees and their families. 1 year ago, I stood before you and announced we would preserve 347 jobs. Tonight, I can report promise kept. 0 involuntary layoffs, 147 successful retraining completions, 33 successful transitions to alternative positions, 347 families intact. The applause was genuine and warm. Marcus saw Sarah Chen with her 3 kids. She'd gotten a 20% raise after excelling in data analytics. James Morrison was there with his wife, enjoying a retirement, but keeping in touch. David Chen stood near the front, his wife Amy beside him, both of them smiling. But this isn't the end, Diana continued. It's the beginning. We've proved that success and compassion aren't mutually exclusive, that investing in people creates value, that doing the right thing is also the smart thing, and we're going to keep proving it. She gestured to Marcus. I'm announcing tonight a new position, Vice President of People and Culture. This role will ensure that what we built this year becomes who we are forever. And I'm honored to announce that Marcus Hayes has accepted this position. The applause grew louder. Marcus stood uncomfortable with attention, but grateful for the opportunity. Sophie clapped the hardest, her light-up shoes flashing in the dim ballroom. After the speeches, Sophie presented Diana with her latest drawing, the company building, surrounded by people holding hands labeled "Everyone Matters." You have to hang it in your office. Sophie was very serious. So you never forget. I could never forget. Diana met Marcus's gaze over Sophie's head. Not with you two around to remind me. New Year's Eve arrived with soft snow falling over Chicago. Marcus's apartment wasn't silent this time. Sophie insisted on staying up. Marcus's mother came over, and at 11:58, right on schedule, came the knock. Sophie ran to answer. Mrs. Westbrook Diana entered carrying champagne and sparkling cider. Her professional armor completely gone. She belonged here now. The four of them counted down together, toasted at midnight, celebrated the turning of another year. After Sophie was asleep and Marcus's mother had gone home, Diana and Marcus stood by the window watching snow blanket the city. 1 year. Diana's voice was soft. It feels like a lifetime. For 347 families, it was everything. Marcus thought about David Chen, about Sarah Chen, about James Morrison, about all the lives that had been preserved because two people had chosen to fight. You changed mine. Diana looked at him. A year ago, I had no one. Now I have this. Friends. People who actually know me. A life outside the office. You always had the capacity for it. You just needed permission to try. Thank you for that, for the honesty, for the partnership, for reminding me that numbers represent people. Thank you for listening. They were quiet for a moment, watching the city sleep under its blanket of white. Same time next year, Diana asked. Always, Marcus smiled. You know where to find me. I do now. Diana's voice held warmth that hadn't existed a year ago, and that's worth more than any quarterly earnings report. The snow fell harder, covering Chicago in silence. Somewhere in the city, 347 families were sleeping peacefully. Somewhere a man named David Chen was alive because someone had told him he mattered. Somewhere the idea that compassion and capitalism could coexist had taken root and grown. Marcus Hayes stood in his modest apartment with Diana Westbrook, and neither of them was alone anymore. The knock at midnight had changed both their lives, not through romance or wealth or fame, but through connection, purpose, the recognition that people who cared about each other could change the world one choice at a time. The year turned, the snow fell, and two unlikely allies who'd become true friends watched the dawn of a year they'd fought to make possible. Not the end of the story, but a beginning proof that the people who matter most aren't always the ones with power, but the ones willing to tell the truth. That sometimes the hardest walls to break down are the ones we build ourselves. That numbers represent people, and people are worth fighting for. Sometimes heroes don't wear capes. They just show up, tell the truth, and refuse to give up when everyone says they should. And sometimes a knock at midnight from the last person you'd expect is exactly what you need to remember who you wanted to be before the world taught you to be someone else.